Find a comfortable place, dim the lights, and settle in. There's a lake in the back of Hollow County, long and deep and cold enough in August to take the breath out of you. There was a camp on the west shore for almost 100 years, and there's a camp on the east shore still. The children who swam there loved it. The people who worked there loved it too. That's the part nobody tells you about places like this. They aren't grim, they're beautiful. They're full of sunlight and pine and kids learning to swim. But something is keeping count. So take a deep breath, listen closely, and welcome to Echoes in the Dark. I lifeguarded at Camp Blackwood for 3 summers, on the lake in the back of Hollow County, and I want to start by telling you that it was, for 2 of those 3 summers, the best job I have ever had. I say that because people who tell stories like this one usually leave that part out, and it matters. It was sunlight on water and kids learning to swim, and the smell of pine and sunscreen, and I loved it. And I would go back to the first 2 summers in a heartbeat. It's the third one I need to talk about. The lake at Blackwood isn't big, maybe 40 acres, spring-fed, cold even in July once you got past the shallows. The swim area was roped off into 3 sections by depth, with a floating dock at the far edge of the deep end, and my chair sat up on the beach where I could see the whole thing. Standard waterfront setup. Standard job. You watch the water, you count heads, you enforce the buddy system, you blow the whistle when something needs to stop. The whistle is the whole job, really. That's the thing I want you to understand before I tell you the rest. The same way I had to understand it before any of it made sense. A lifeguard's authority is almost entirely a whistle. You can't physically stop 40 kids from doing 40 dangerous things. What you have is a sound that everyone has agreed to obey. 1 blast, stop, look at me. 2 blasts, buddy check, grab your partner's hand and hold it up. 3 blasts, everyone out, now. The kids learn it the first day. The whole system runs on the agreement that when the whistle goes, you do the thing the whistle means. Hold on to that, it comes back. The head lifeguard my 3rd summer was a woman named Deb, who had been working that waterfront for something like 20 years. She was in her 50s, leathery from a lifetime of summers, absolutely unflappable. The kind of person who had pulled enough kids out of enough water that nothing on that lake could surprise her anymore. On my first day back that 3rd year, before the campers arrived, she walked me through the waterfront the way she did every year. The depth markers, the weak spots in the dock, the spring inlet on the north end where the water ran suddenly, shockingly cold. And at the end of it, standing on the beach with the empty lake in front of us, she told me the rule. She said it the way you'd mention a safety regulation, flat and unremarkable, which is I think the only way she could still say it after 20 years. She said, "Swim call ends at dusk, not after. You get everyone out of the water before the light's fully gone, every time, no exceptions, and you blow 3 blasts to close the swim." And then she said the part I didn't understand. Yet. After you blow to close, she said, sometimes you'll hear a second whistle, out on the water, after yours. It'll sound just like yours. She was looking at the lake when she said it, not at me. You do not blow back. You do not answer it. You get the kids up to the mess hall and you do not, for any reason, blow your whistle again until morning. I asked her what the second whistle was. She said, "It's the lake asking if there's anyone still in the water." And then she picked up the rescue tube and started walking up the beach, and the conversation was over, in the way that conversations with Deb were over when she decided they were. I did not take it seriously. I want to be honest about that, because it's the through line of every story like this. Somebody is told the rule, and somebody doesn't believe the rule, and the not believing is the actual subject of the story. I'd worked that lake 2 summers already and never heard a second whistle, and my read on Deb was that she was a wonderful, weathered old camp lifer who'd absorbed a piece of camp folklore so deep that she'd started reciting it as safety procedure. Camps are full of that. Every camp has its lake ghost, its haunted cabin, its counselor who died in some year nobody can pin down. It's part of the furniture. I filed the second whistle right next to all of it and got on with the summer. And for the first few weeks, the summer was ordinary and wonderful, the way the first 2 had been. Then, in the 3rd week, I closed a swim at dusk. blew my 3 blasts, watched the kids stream up the beach toward the mess hall, and heard, out over the water, from somewhere near the floating dock, 3 whistle blasts. Just like mine. I want to describe exactly what that was like, because the wrongness of it was specific, and it took my brain a few seconds to catch up to my body. The sound was right. That's the thing. It wasn't a spooky, distorted, otherworldly whistle. It was a lifeguard's whistle, a Fox 40, the exact same model clipped to the lanyard around my own neck, blown in the exact cadence I had just used. 3 blasts, closing the swim. If I'd heard it with my back turned, I would have assumed another guard was on the water. But there was no other guard on the water. Deb was up the beach. I was the only person with a whistle within 100 yards, and the swim area was empty. I just cleared it. I'd counted every kid up onto the sand, myself. And the whistle had come from the deep end, from out by the floating dock, from the water. My hand went to my own whistle. It's pure reflex. You hear a whistle, you answer a whistle. It's the most trained response in the job. I got it halfway to my mouth before Deb's voice, from 30 feet up the beach, cut across the whole thing, low and hard, and absolutely without panic. Don't. I stopped. She walked down to me, calm as anything, and put her hand flat over the whistle at my chest. Gently, the way you'd cover a candle, and she said, "Up to the mess hall. Now. Both of us. And you keep that in your mouth quiet till morning." I went. And behind us, as we walked up the beach in the last of the light, the whistle blew again out on the water. 3 blasts, waiting for an answer. I did not give it one, but I wanted to. God help me, some deep, trained part of me wanted to so badly that I had to hold the whistle away from my face with my hand the whole way up the hill. Deb told me the rest that night, on the mess hall porch, after the kids were in their cabins. She told it plainly, the way she told everything, and I'm going to give it to you, close to the way she gave it to me. The rule, she said, went back further than anyone at the camp could properly account for. There'd been a drowning at Blackwood, a long time ago. She wasn't precise about when, and I got the sense that the vagueness was deliberate, that the not knowing exactly was part of how the older staff had learned to live with it. A swim that ran too long, into the dark. A child in the water after the light was gone. A guard who didn't get a clean count. And ever since, she said, the lake kept a kind of ledger. That's the word she used. Ledger. She said the second whistle was the lake taking its own count. When you blow 3 blasts to close the swim, you're saying the water's empty, everyone's out, we're done. And the second whistle, she said, was the lake blowing back the same call. 3 blasts, to ask the same question the other direction. Is that right? Is the water empty? Is everyone out? And if you blow back, Deb said, you've answered it. You've told it there's a conversation happening. You've told it you're still on duty, still counting, still responsible for who's in the water. And then it'll show you someone who isn't out yet. It'll give you a reason to go back in. I asked her, and I remember the exact, stupid, reasonable way I asked it, whether that wasn't a good thing. If there was a kid still in the water, wouldn't you want to know? Deb looked at me for a long moment. There's never a kid still in the water, she said. I always count them up myself. 20 years, I have never once closed a swim with a child unaccounted for. The lake knows that. That's not what it's asking. She turned back to the dark shape of the water down the hill. It's not asking if you left a kid in the lake. It's asking if you'll come back in after one. And if you answer, if you blow back, if you go down to that water in the dark to check a count you already know is right, then it's got you. A guard, in the water, after dark, off a beach with no light, answering a whistle nobody blew. That's the drowning it's been trying to have for 100 years. It doesn't want the kids. It's got all the kids it needs. It wants the one who goes in after them. She stood up and knocked the porch rail twice with her knuckles, some old habit, and said the thing I've never forgotten. The water gives the kids back every single night, she said, as long as nobody answers the second whistle. You keep your count, you trust your count, and you never, ever go back in to check it. I believed her after that. Mostly. I want to be honest that mostly is the crack that everything eventually came through, because I believed her the way you believe a thing at night on a porch that you start to unbelieve a little every sunny morning after. The rest of that summer, the second whistle came maybe a dozen times. Not every night. There was no pattern I could find. I'd close a swim, blow my 3, and sometimes, one time in 5, one time in 7, 3 blasts would come back across the water, and I'd take my hand off my whistle and walk the kids up the hill and not answer, and by morning the lake would be a lake again, blue and ordinary, and full of laughing children. I got good at not answering. It stopped feeling supernatural and started feeling like just another part of the job, like checking the dock for splinters. Close the swim. If it whistles back, don't answer, walk away. Fine. And that ease is exactly how it got me. At the very end of the summer, on the second to last night. It was the last big swim of the season, an evening free swim that ran right up to dusk, the whole camp in the water, 40-some kids and 3 guards. Deb had gone into town that afternoon for supplies and gotten held up, a flat or a slow feed store, something ordinary. And so for that one swim, I was the senior guard on the waterfront, with 2 17-year-olds under me who'd been on the job 6 weeks. I closed the swim right at dusk, blew my 3 blasts, and it was a big, messy end-of-summer exit. 40 wet, tired, overexcited kids, all trying to get out of the water at once, splashing, horsing around, one of the counselors doing a whole dramatic countdown thing on the beach. I counted them up, I did, but it was chaos, and my count came out, and I trusted it. And I got that specific small itch you get when a count in chaos might have been a kid off, might not have been. And then the second whistle came. 3 blasts, from the deep end, by the dock. And I heard, right behind it, or I thought I heard, I have spent years unable to decide, a child's voice, out on the water, calling. I need you to understand what that does to a lifeguard. Everything Deb told me went out of my head in a single second, because the entire architecture of who I was in that job was built on one instruction that ran deeper than any folklore. If there is a child in the water, you go in. That's not a rule you follow. That's a rule you are. 3 summers, a lifetime of training, every drill, every certification, all of it pointing one direction, and the direction was the water. I had my whistle in my mouth, and I blew back before I made any decision at all. 3 blasts. An answer. I hear you. I'm coming. Is there someone still in the water? The lake went absolutely silent. And the 2 17-year-olds were staring at me, and one of them said, "Who's still in?" Because they'd heard me blow the recall and check, and they were reaching for their own tubes, ready to follow me in. 2 kids ready to go into that dark water because their senior guard had just told them someone was still out there. That's the moment. That's the one I go back to. Not the whistle, that. 2 teenagers, on their feet, tubes in hand, waiting for me to lead them into the lake, in the dark. Because I'd answered. I went in alone. That was the one good decision inside the enormous bad one. I told them both, hard, to stay on the beach and get a light and count the kids again up at the mess hall. And I went into the water alone. Because if the story Deb told me was true, then I was not going to put 2 17-year-olds in the lake to test it. The water was black. Dusk dark, spring cold, the specific disorienting cold of the inlet end. And I swam out toward the dock, toward where the whistle had come from, and where I'd heard, or thought I'd heard, a child's voice. There was no child. Of course there was no child. My count had been right. My count is always right. Deb told me the count is always right, and it was. All 40-some kids were up on that beach, and I knew it even as I swam. And I swam anyway. Because I'd answered. And answering meant going. And going meant I was now a guard in the water after dark, checking a count I already knew was good, which is the exact shape of the thing the lake had been trying to make happen for 100 years. I got to the dock and there was nothing there. And the moment I stopped swimming in treaded water in that black cold and let myself understand that there was nothing there, the cold took me. I don't have a supernatural description of what happened next, and I'm not going to invent one, because what actually happened is bad enough. The inlet water at that end was cold enough to do what cold water does. It hit me all at once now that I'd stopped moving, and my chest seized, that involuntary gasp reflex you're trained to know about and are still helpless against. And I took in water on the gasp. And then I was a drowning person, which is a fast and quiet and undramatic thing. Nothing like the movies. Just a person in cold black water who suddenly cannot make the arrangement of breathing and staying up work at the same time. I went under. I came up. I got a breath that was half water. I went under again, and the whole time there was a part of my mind, weirdly calm, narrating it. This is it. This is the drowning. This is the one it's been waiting for. You answered, and you came in, and now it has you, a guard, off the dark beach, exactly the way it wanted. What saved me was Deb. She'd come back from town, pulled into the camp, seen from the parking lot 2 teenagers on the beach with a flashlight and no senior guard, and known, instantly, 20 years of knowing, exactly what had happened. She came down that beach at a dead run for a woman in her 50s, and she did not go in the water. That's the part I think about most. She did not answer the lake either. She stayed on the dock, on the wood, out of the water, and she got the reaching pole, and she got down flat on the dock. And she got that pole to me on maybe the 3rd pass, and she hauled me in from a place she never let the lake pull her into, and she did it without ever once putting herself in the water in the dark. She knew the rule, even in the middle of saving me, especially in the middle of saving me. They did the whole thing, got me up on the dock, got the water out of me, the coughing and the retching and the shaking. An ambulance came the 40 minutes out from town. I'd aspirated enough lake water that they kept me overnight watching for what they called secondary drowning, the thing where your lungs keep reacting hours after you're out. And for a day or so, it was genuinely uncertain. And then it wasn't, and I was fine. Mostly fine. Here's the lasting part, and it's small, and it's with me every day. My lungs never fully came back. Not dramatically, I'm not on oxygen, I'm not disabled, I live a completely normal life. But I aspirated enough cold lake water that night to leave something behind, some scarring, some reactivity. The doctors were never totally precise about it. What it means, day to day, is that I have a cough that comes back. Cold air brings it. Damp brings it. Lying down flat at night sometimes brings it. A wet catch at the bottom of a breath. A little rattle that wasn't there before that summer. And in the quiet, at night, when that catch comes up at the bottom of a breath, it sounds a little like water. Like a small amount of water, moving somewhere it shouldn't be. In me. I carry a little of that lake around in my chest now. It answers, in the dark, in its own way, every night. And every time it does, I think the same thing, which is the thing Deb spent 20 years trying to teach me before I made her run down a beach to keep the lake from finishing what I'd started. The count is always right. You do not go back in to check it. I never lifeguarded again. Not out of fear of the water exactly. I can still swim. I take my own kids to pools. I'm fine in daylight in water I can see the bottom of. It's the responsibility I can't take back up. The whistle. The being the one who's agreed to go in. I can't be that again, because I know now that I'm the kind of person who'll answer, and some part of me is always going to be the kind of person who'll answer. And the only safe move is to never again be the one wearing the whistle. Deb worked that waterfront 4 more summers and then retired. And as far as I know, nobody ever drowned at Camp Blackwood on her watch. In 24 years. Because she understood the one thing it took me nearly dying to learn. The lake gives the kids back every night. All of them. Every single time. As long as nobody answers the second whistle. Camp Ketchewan sits on the east shore of a long, spring-fed lake in the back of Hollow County, and for the 2 summers I was a counselor there, it was, by every measure that shows up in a brochure, a good camp. Well-run, well-funded, a real waterfront, a nurse on staff, a director who genuinely cared about the kids. I want to establish that, because nothing I'm going to tell you is a story about a bad camp, or negligence, or anything a parent could have looked at and known to fear. It was a good camp on a beautiful lake. And that is exactly the kind of place this happens. The lake mattered more than I understood. It was big. You couldn't throw a stone across it, and on a hazy day you could barely make out the far shore. And cold, fed from the bottom by springs, so that even in August the deep water would take your breath. Quechuan had the east shore, and across the water, on the west shore, close enough to see and far enough that you'd never walk it, was another camp. Or there had been. Camp Blackwood. It had closed a few years before I started, and by my time it was just a shape across the lake. Dark buildings, a sagging dock, a flagpole with no flag, the whole thing going back to the woods. The kids at Quechuan told stories about it the way kids tell stories about any forbidden place they can see but can't reach. Somebody drowned over there, that's why it closed. Nobody knew the details, and everybody agreed on the broad strokes, which is how you know a story has become folklore. I didn't think about Blackwood much. It was scenery, a dark smudge that made for good campfire stories, and otherwise had nothing to do with my job, which was 7 9-year-old girls in cabin 6, and getting all 7 of them through 2 weeks of camp alive, fed, and reasonably happy. 7. Hold on to that number. It's the whole story. The counselor's job, stripped down, is a counting job. Anyone who's done it will tell you the same thing. You count your kids constantly, reflexively, all day long, until it stops being conscious and becomes a process running underneath everything else. Loading the bus, count. Leaving the mess hall, count. Trailhead, waterfront, campfire, cabin, count. You develop a feel for your specific number the way you develop a feel for a song you've heard 1,000 times. You don't count to 7 so much as you feel the shape of 7, and you feel it instantly when the shape is wrong. My shape was 7. 7 girls in cabin 6, 4 bunk beds, 8 spots. So one bunk, the top bunk in the far corner, stood empty all session. I knew those 7 the way you know children you're responsible for around the clock. Names, allergies, which 2 couldn't be bunked near each other, which one cried the first week and which one stopped, which one was funny, which one was homesick. 7 specific children. The one who matters most in this story is a girl I'll call Maddie, because she's the reason I'm still afraid of that lake, and I'd rather not use her real name even now. She was the quiet one, the homesick one, the kind of 9-year-old who's a little too gentle for a place full of loud kids, who hangs at the edge of things, who a counselor watches a little closer because the world is going to be hard on her. Her bunk was the bottom one in the far corner, under the empty top bunk. Remember that. The first sign wasn't mine. It was the kids. Third day of the session, at breakfast, one of my louder girls asked me, completely casually, over her cereal, whether the new girl was coming to the lake that day. I asked her, what new girl? The one in our cabin, she said, like I was being slow. The one who sleeps up top. And she pointed her spoon, vaguely, at nothing, and went back to eating, and 2 of the other girls nodded like this was old news. And I said there was no new girl, our cabin was full up, and they shrugged and the subject died the way subjects die, with 9-year-olds. I want to be honest that I thought nothing of it. Kids invent people constantly. An imaginary bunkmate in a top bunk is about the most ordinary thing a homesick group of little girls could dream up. If anything, I found it sweet. Then it kept happening, and it stopped being sweet. They saved her a seat. Not dramatically, I just started noticing a gap in the row at the mess hall, a space the girls left open and slid the milk toward, and when I asked, they'd say it was for the new girl. She liked to sit there. On the trail, they'd sometimes hold a spot in line. At the campfire, one of them scooted over to make room on the log, unprompted, and patted the empty space beside her. And Maddie, quiet Maddie, was the one who talked about her most. Not excited the way the loud girls were. Careful. Maddie talked about the new girl the way you talk about someone you're a little afraid of and don't want to be rude to. She says she used to go to camp here, Maddie told me once, picking at her dinner. A different here. The other side. And she looked, when she said it, across the water, at the dark shape of Blackwood on the far shore. and I felt something go cold in me that I did not yet have a reason for. Another time, Maddie said, apropos of nothing, in the small, flat voice she used only for the new girl. Her lips are blue. I told her she should get warm, and she said she can't anymore. And she went back to her dinner, and I did not, for a long moment, go back to mine. I saw her myself for the first time on the 5th night. Lights out count. I walked the cabin with my flashlight low, counting sleeping shapes, and I got 8. 8. 7 beds I knew, and the corner top bunk, the one that had been empty all session, occupied. A girl asleep up top, blanket to her chin, hair spread on the pillow, directly above Maddie. My first reaction was pure logistics. A kid from another cabin had snuck over, and I needed to walk her back. I crouched by the bunk and put my light on her, gently. And it was a girl I had never seen. Not one of mine. Not, I was fairly sure, anyone's. I want to describe her the way I actually saw her, because the details are the part I've never been able to put down. She was the right size for a 9-year-old, and the wrong everything else. Her skin had the pale, faintly swollen, waterlogged look of hands left too long in a bath, all over, even her face, soft and puckered at the edges like something that had been in water a long time and never fully dried. Her hair was dark and wet, dripping, though the pillow beneath it was old and the wet on it looked old too, a stain more than a spill. And she was too still. A sleeping child moves, breathes, twitches, shifts. She lay with the flat, arranged stillness of a doll someone had posed, and when I finally noticed that her chest wasn't rising, that she wasn't breathing at all, I understood I'd been looking at it for several seconds without letting myself see it. I put my hand on her shoulder to wake her, and her shoulder was cold. Cold the way the deep water is cold, in a warm cabin on a summer night, and wet through her nightgown, and I pulled my hand back before I decided to. She opened her eyes, and they were the last wrong thing. They didn't have the bleary unfocus of a kid waking up. They opened all at once, already fixed on me, and there was too much dark in them, the way an animal's eyes are all pupil in a flashlight beam, except a child's shouldn't be. She was wide awake and had been the whole time, and she said in a flat, patient, wet little voice, "You found me." I asked her, stupidly, which cabin she was in. "This one," she said. "Now." And she looked down, over the edge of the bunk, at Maddie asleep below her. "There's a spot." Then she closed her eyes, and I stood there with my heart slamming, and I did the thing I have gone over 10,000 times since. I told myself it was a lost kid and an exhausted counselor, and I would sort it out in the morning. And I finished my count. 8. And I did not sleep. And in the gray hour before dawn, I looked up at that bunk, and it was empty and made up, blankets squared, and there were 7 girls in cabin 6. But there was a wet mark on the pillow of the top bunk, a dark, spreading, damp patch, the exact size of a small head. It smelled like the lake. It was the only thing in the whole cabin that morning that proved I hadn't dreamed her. I went to the director. I want to tell you what that was like, because it's part of why these things get as far as they do. Tom had run Quechuan for 11 years, and he was a good man, and I sat in his office and tried to explain that I kept counting 8 kids in a cabin of 7, that there was a girl who wasn't on any roster sleeping in my empty bunk, that my campers all knew her and saved her a seat. And I watched myself sound insane in real time, because everything I said had a reasonable answer, and Tom, kindly, gave me each one. A visiting kid, a miscount in the dark, exhausted counselors see things, imaginary friends spread through a cabin like a cold. He did check. He pulled every cabin's roster and confirmed the whole camp was accounted for. Every child at Quechuan on exactly one list. All present, all closed. There was no extra child at the camp. "So whoever your girls are pretending is up there," he said, not unkindly, "isn't one of ours who wandered. Nobody's missing from anywhere. Count 'em by name. If you're 7 or you're 7, you're fine. If you're 7 or you're 7, you're fine. That was the sentence I held on to for exactly 6 more days, until it stopped being true. She got bolder, and she got angry. And both of those happened because I would not do the one thing she wanted, which I didn't yet understand was the one thing I must never do. Because I'd figured out that much, at least, on instinct. Every night now the count came up 8. Every night she was in that corner bunk over Maddie. And every night, walking the cabin with my light, I made myself count only my 7. My real 7, by name, and stop. 7. I would not let my mouth or my mind put her at 8. I don't know how I knew that mattered. I knew it the way you know not to answer when something knocks and you weren't expecting anyone. And she did not like it. The first few nights of being refused, she was just present. The wet pillow, the cold, a wet child asleep in a bunk that emptied by dawn. Then, as the refusals stacked up, the cabin started to turn. The temperature dropped. Not metaphorically. Cabin 6 ran cold at night now. Cold enough that the girls asked for extra blankets. Cold in a heat wave. A lake-bottom cold that pooled in that far corner and crept out. Things got wet. I'd find the corner floorboards damp in the morning, then a slick trail of lake water leading from the corner bunk toward the door, toward the path, toward the water. The cabin started to smell like the lake all the time. That cold mineral rot, strongest over Maddie's bed. And the manifestations stopped being sleepy. One night I woke to all 7 of my girls sitting up in their bunks at once, in the dark, silent, awake, facing the corner. Not scared, attentive, like they were listening to someone I couldn't hear. When I put my light on them, they blinked and lay back down and didn't remember it in the morning. All except Maddie, who remembered, and who wouldn't tell me what the new girl had been saying, only that, "She's mad at you, and she says it's not fair, because there's a spot and you won't let her have it." I asked Maddie what spot. Maddie looked at me with the particular fear of a child who has understood something an adult hasn't, and she said, "Mine." That's when I understood the whole shape of it, and it was so much worse than a lonely ghost wanting company. She didn't want to be added to the count. She'd tried that, a nightly 8, an extra, a guest, and I'd refused her, and you can't be a guest forever. What she wanted was to belong, to be one of the real 7, permanently, a name on the roster, a child of cabin 6 that no counselor would ever leave out again, and a count only holds so many. For her to become one of the 7 had to become the extra, had to become the one who gets left out, had to take the place she'd been stuck in for years, the child on the far side of the count, the one who goes to the water and doesn't come back, and somehow doesn't change the number. She'd picked Maddie. Of course she'd picked Maddie. The quiet one, the gentle one, the one in the bunk directly below her, the one too soft for the world, the easiest of my 7 to move to the edge and slip out. She was going to swap. Put Maddie in the water, take Maddie's place in the count, and leave me counting 7 that were still 7, all present, all named, except that one of the names now belonged to something that had come across the lake. And Maddie would be the dark shape on the far shore, learning to be patient, waiting years for the next counselor who'd leave a spot open. And the count would come out right the whole time. That was the horror of it. The night it happened, if it happened, I would walk the cabin and count 7, and they would be 7, and the shape would feel right. And I would turn off the lantern and go to sleep, and a child would be gone, and nothing in the count would tell me. That's what happened at Blackwood. I was sure of it now. A counselor, years ago, on the far side of this same lake, counted her kids at the end of a swim and got the right number, and it was a lie. And a child went into the deep, cold water, and the count stayed whole, and by the time anyone understood the number was lying, it was too late. And the camp died of it. And the child it left out had been crossing the water ever since, looking for a way back into a count, not to be added, but to trade. The last 3 nights were a siege, and I need you to feel how trapped I was, because the trap is the whole thing. I could not count her in. I understood now that counting her to 8, letting her be one of us, was not mercy. It was the swap. It was me, with my own sacred nightly arithmetic, ratifying her into the 7, and Maddie out of it. The one act she'd been pushing me toward all session, the kind act, the act of including the lonely child, was the exact mechanism of the murder. If I ever counted 8 and meant it, I'd have done it myself. But I could not simply refuse her either, because refusing her was making her angry, and her anger was landing on Maddie. By the second to last night, Maddie was sleepwalking. I woke to the cabin door standing open, cold and wet air coming in, and Maddie halfway down the path to the waterfront in her bare feet, walking calm and asleep toward the black water, and above and behind her, I swear this on everything, a second small shape, in a wet nightgown, walking her down like a shepherd. It moved wrong. It didn't walk so much as it was drawn, smooth and level, feet trailing through the wet grass without quite taking her weight, the way a thing floats just under the surface of water and is carried by the current rather than swimming. In the dark, I could see the pale smudge of her face turned toward me over her shoulder, watching me the whole way down, and where her eyes should have caught my flashlight and shone, they didn't. They took the light and gave nothing back. 2 dark holes in a waterlogged little face. I got to Maddie and grabbed her, and her skin was cold and her eyes were open, and she said, in a voice that was hers and also had a wet catch in it that was not, "It's my turn to go to the other side." I carried her back. I sat in the doorway the rest of that night with Maddie in my lap and my back against the frame, between her and the lake, and out on the black water I could hear, faint, the sound of a child, treading water and waiting. And I did not sleep. And I understood that the next night was the last night of the session, and that whatever was going to happen then. Because after that, Maddie went home and out of reach, and the thing across the lake was not going to let its easiest spot in years walk out the front gate. I'm not a clever person, and I didn't solve this with cleverness. I solved it with the one thing I'd learned, and I only understood it fully sitting in that doorway with a cold child in my arms. She needed a count to be wrong in her favor. That was the whole mechanism. Every time, at both camps, it worked by making a false number feel true. Her power was in the lie the count told. Blackwood died because a counselor trusted a number that was lying to her. So on the last night, I did not trust the number. I broke the count. I did not do lights out with a flashlight in the dark. I turned on every light in cabin 6, and I woke all 7 of my girls, gently, and I made it a game, a last night of camp game. And I lined them up, and I had each of them say her own name, out loud, and I touched each one on the shoulder as she did. Warm shoulders, all 7, real and warm and named. And I did it 3 times, out loud, in the light, with the girls laughing at the silliness of it. Not a silent count in the dark that something could slip a lie into. 7 names, 7 warm shoulders, spoken and witnessed and true, with no room in it for an 8th, and no darkness for a swap to happen in. And I did not look at the corner bunk. I did not acknowledge it, I did not count it in, and I did not count it out. I simply made the true 7 so loud, and so warm, and so undeniable, that there was no gap left for a false number to live in. You can't slip an extra into a count that's being shouted in the light by the children themselves. The temperature in that cabin dropped so hard I saw my own breath. The wet corner went from damp to streaming, water running out of the empty bunk like something climbing out of a lake, and the smell was overwhelming. And for one moment, every light in the cabin dimmed to almost nothing, and I heard her. Close, right at my ear, furious now, all the patience gone, in a voice full of cold water. "You won't let her have it. There's a spot." And I said the only thing I had. I said, out loud, to the corner, with my 7 warm-named girls behind me in the light, "Not here. Every one of mine is counted. There's no spot for you here." The lights came back up. The cold broke. The water in the corner was just water, already drying, and I stood in a bright cabin full of 7 confused, giggling, sleepy little girls, All 7, all warm, all named, and Maddie was one of them. And the corner bunk was empty and stayed empty. And in the morning we packed the buses, and I got all 7 of my girls home to their parents. And I counted them onto that bus out loud, by name, in the daylight, 3 times. And I have never in my life been so glad to reach 7. I didn't go back to Quechuan, not out of simple fear, more that I'd learned something about counting that I couldn't unlearn. Tom kept running the camp, and as far as I know, it's still there, still good, still on the east shore of that cold lake. Blackwood's still across the water, going back to the woods a little more each year. Here's the small permanent thing I carry. I count now, everywhere, all the time. It never switched back off. In a theater, I count the row. On a bus, I count the kids. At my own children's birthday parties, I count the kids in the yard, over and over, a process I can't stop. And every single time, I feel the cold pull to count one more than I can see, to let the number be one higher, to include the one who isn't there. I never do, and I never count children in the dark. And I never trust a count I can't say out loud. And I never, ever let a number feel right without checking it against warm shoulders and spoken names. Because I know now what a false count is for. I know there's a girl on the far side of a lake in Hollow County, patient as deep water, who has spent longer than I've been alive looking for a counselor who'll do her the kindness of including her. A counselor tired enough, or gentle enough, or afraid enough of being cruel to a lonely child to look at 7 kids in the dark and let the number quietly become 8. Don't. If you ever count children in the dark and the number comes out 1 too high, don't reach for the kind answer. Don't include her. Turn on the lights. Count the ones who are there. Only the ones who are there. Out loud, by name, until there's no dark left for the extra one to be true in. And get them home. I need to start by telling you that I loved Camp Blackwood, because everything I'm about to say is going to make that hard to believe, and it's the most important, true thing in the whole story. I went there as a camper for 6 summers, and came back as a counselor for 4 more, on the west shore of a long, cold lake in the back of Hollow County. And those 10 summers were the best part of my childhood, and most of the best part of my early 20s. Blackwood made me who I am. That's not despite what I found out. That's the thing that makes what I found out so hard to carry. Blackwood's closed now. Has been for years. If you've heard of it at all, you've heard it the way people hear about closed camps. That something happened, a drowning, a tragedy, that they shut it down. That's true as far as it goes. It just isn't the part that matters, and it isn't the part I'm here to tell you. Because I was there for the part that matters, and I've spent a long time deciding whether to say it out loud. I'm going to tell it through the pictures, because that's how it came to me. It's how it comes to everyone who ever figures it out, I think. Through the pictures. And too late. Every summer camp takes a group photo. You know the one. The whole camp arranged on risers or on the lodge steps, littlest kids in front, counselors along the back, everybody squinting into the sun, the year painted on a banner or a board somewhere in the frame. Blackwood took one every summer, and had done for as long as it existed, and the whole set of them hung in the main lodge, framed, in a long row down the big log wall over the stone fireplace. Decades of them, going back to sepia and forward to color. A whole century of children who'd loved that lake exactly the way I did. As a camper, you don't look at them. They're wallpaper. As a young counselor, you look a little. You find your own camper photos. You laugh at the haircuts. You point out the counselors who are still around. It's a nice tradition, nostalgic, warm. It was my 3rd summer as a counselor, a rainy afternoon with the campers stuck inside, that I really looked. I was killing time by the fireplace, going down the road, doing the thing everyone does, finding myself as a little kid, tracking backward through the years. And I got to enjoying a particular game, which was finding the counselors who'd been around a long time. Blackwood had a few lifers. There was a man on staff my whole tenure named Mr. Elias, an older man, groundskeeper mostly, did a little of everything, the kind of gentle, weathered camp fixture that every good camp has. Kids loved him. He'd been there forever, everyone said. Forever. You know how people say that. I found Mr. Elias in that year's photo, back row, off to the side where he always stood. Then I found him in the photo from my first summer as a camper, 10 years back, same spot. Then, idly, I went looking for him further back, because it was a fun game, seeing how far back Mr. Elias went. He went back all the way. I want to walk you through the next 20 minutes, the way they actually happened, because the horror of it wasn't a single moment. It was accumulation. It was the slow, sickening way a thing you're looking at directly refuses to stop being true. He was in the photo from 10 years back, and he looked exactly the same. That's normal-ish. Adults look the same across a decade to a kid, and I told myself so. He was in the one from 20 years back, off to the side, and he looked the same, and I felt the first small wrongness, the way you feel a stare that isn't there. He was in the one from 40 years back, black and white now, the campers in old-fashioned swimsuits. Same man, same spot, same weathered, gentle face, not one day younger, not one day older. I stopped telling myself things around the 60-year mark. There's a photo on that wall from what the banner said was 1931. Sepia, cracked, formal. A smaller camp, kids in wool bathing costumes, squinting at a box camera. And there, in the back row, off to the side, in the exact spot he stood in the photo we'd taken that same summer I was looking, was Mr. Elias. The same man, the same face, the same slightly tilted way of standing, hands folded in front of him, looking not quite at the camera, but a little off to the side, down toward where the littlest children sat. 90 years. He was in every photo for 90 years, and he had not aged a single day in any of them. And I was standing in a lodge where, at that very moment, I could hear him through the window, out in the rain, calmly raking the wet leaves off the lodge path, humming, the way he did every afternoon. The same man, 90 years old at least, and looking 50, who had watched 1,000 children come and go, and had personally, gently, been part of every summer of that camp's entire existence. I did the reasonable things first. Everyone does the reasonable things first. It's how you survive believing something impossible. You make it walk past every ordinary explanation you own. A family resemblance. A father, a son, a grandson. All named Elias, all groundskeepers, all standing in the same spot. A dynasty of camp caretakers, which would be sweet, actually, and completely mundane. I clung to that one hard. It lasted until I looked closer at the faces, at the specific things a face has that a bloodline doesn't repeat exactly. The particular set of a scar over one eyebrow, a chip in a front tooth you could see when he was mid-hum, the exact asymmetry of a real human face. They were identical. Not similar. The same chip, the same scar, the same face across 90 years, down to the flaw. A prank, then. Old photos doctored, the current Elias inserted for a laugh, some long-running camp in-joke. But these were real photographs, decades of them, some older than photo manipulation was easy, framed and faded and fly-specked and screwed to a wall by people long dead. And then the reasonable things ran out, the way they always do, and I was left standing at a fireplace holding the actual shape of it, which was that a man had been at that lake for at least 90 years, unchanged, and everyone had always said he'd been there forever, and they were right. And nobody had ever done the small arithmetic of looking at the wall, because the wall was just wallpaper, and Mr. Elias was just kind old Mr. Elias, who'd been there forever. I want to tell you about Mr. Elias himself now, because once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee him, and the man I'd loved my whole camp life became something I watched. He was kind. That's the thing I keep having to say, because it's true and because it's the worst part. He was genuinely, uncomplicatedly kind, the way the best camp people are. He knew every kid's name by the second day. He was gentle with the homesick ones. He ran the little sailboats and taught the nervous kids to swim in the shallows, and sat with the ones who cried. And he never raised his voice, and he never, ever, in 90 years apparently, did a single thing anyone could point to as wrong. And he counted. Once I'd noticed, I couldn't stop noticing. Mr. Elias was always counting the children. At the waterfront, his lips moving. At the lodge steps, his eyes going down the row. On the trail, at the campfire, at the buses on the last day. A soft, constant background count. The way a shepherd counts. The way a man counts a thing he is responsible for and afraid of losing. I'd taken it for years as the sweet habit of an old caretaker who cared. And maybe it was. But I'd started to understand that Mr. Elias was not counting the children the way a counselor counts them. He was counting them the way you count something you're keeping. I did the research. That winter, back home, away from the lake. It's easy now, in a way it wasn't for whoever else might have half noticed over the decades. Old newspapers get scanned, county records go online. You can sit in your apartment and dig up 100 years of a small place in an afternoon. Blackwood the camp opened in 1926, but there'd been something on that west shore before the camp. A farmstead, a family, and the family name, in the oldest records I could find, the deed and the census and a couple of grim little newspaper items, was Elias. There was a drowning. 1924, 2 years before the camp. A child, the Elias family's youngest, went into the deep cold water off that shore and didn't come up. And the item was 4 sentences long, the way tragedies were in those days, and one of the sentences mentioned that the child had been in the care of an older sibling at the time, an older brother, who, the item said, was not himself after, and whom a later item, years on, described as having stayed on the property alone after the rest of the family moved away, working the land, and then, when the camp bought the shore, staying on as its groundskeeper. A young man, then, in 1926. The same young man, unaged, raking leaves outside my lodge window in the rain, 90-plus years later, counting the children. I understood it then, all of it, in one cold rush, and I've never been able to make it not true. He lost a child to that lake, a child in his care, and he never left. He could not leave. I don't think it's that he wouldn't. I think it's that he couldn't. That whatever the lake does to the ones who owe it, it did to him, and it kept him, and it stopped his clock at the moment of his failure and set him to work. For 100 years, he has stood on that shore and counted children, terrified of losing one, gentle and vigilant and unaging, doing the one job the lake left him, keeping the count. And here's the part that closes the whole thing, the part I understood last and worst. He's not keeping the count right. He's keeping it wrong. Because the lake is owed. That's the thing under everything, the thing I only assembled later from what I saw and what happened on the other shore in the years after Blackwood closed. The lake took a child in 1924, and it has never stopped being owed. And a thing that is owed keeps a ledger, and the ledger has to balance. Mr. Elias, the brother, the one whose fault it was, the one who lost the child he was counting, the lake didn't punish him by drowning him. It punished him by making him the counter, forever. On duty every summer, responsible for every child, and the count never quite closing right, so that every so often, across 100 years, the number would come out wrong in the lake's favor, and a child would be one too few, and the count would somehow still feel whole, and Mr. Elias would stand there having failed again, exactly the way he failed the first time, kept alive and kept counting, precisely so that he could keep failing. He wasn't a monster stalking children. That's what I have to make people understand. He was the opposite. He was a heartbroken man who had been counting children on that shore for 100 years, trying with everything in him to never lose another one, and losing them anyway, on a schedule, forever. Because the lake did not keep him there to protect the children. It kept him there to be the reason the count could go wrong. His love was the mechanism. His vigilance was the trap. Every drowning at Blackwood across 100 years happened on the watch of the most watchful man who ever lived. And that was the point. The drowning that finally closed the camp was just the last one. There'd been others, spaced out across the decades, quiet, explained away, the way things get explained away at a place people love. But that last one was too public, or too much, and Blackwood closed, and they moved the good camp across the water to the east shore and called it something else, and told themselves they'd left the tragedy behind on the far bank. They hadn't. The lake was still owed, and the counter was still counting. He just didn't have children to count anymore. I went back. Once. Years after it closed, after I'd figured it all out, I drove up to Hollow County and I walked the overgrown road down to the Blackwood shore, to the dead camp, the sagging dock, the lodge with its roof going in. I told myself I wanted to see the photos one more time. I don't fully know what I wanted. The lodge was open, no locks left worth the name, and the row of photographs was still on the wall over the cold fireplace, warped now with damp, some fallen, all of them fading. I went down the row in the gray light one more time, 100 years of children, and I found him in every single one, back row, off to the side, unchanged, looking down toward the littlest kids. And in the most recent one, the last group photo Blackwood ever took, the summer it closed, I found Mr. Elias in his usual spot. And I found something else that I had not let myself look for, that I checked because I had to and wished I hadn't. He was looking at the camera. In that last photo, for the first time in 100 years of standing off to the side and looking down and away at the children, Mr. Elias was looking directly into the lens, directly out of the photograph, at whoever stood in front of it. And I was alone, in a dead lodge on an abandoned shore, and outside, down at the ruined waterfront, in the still afternoon, I heard the soft, patient, unmistakable sound of a man raking leaves and humming. On a shore where no leaves have been raked in years. I did not go and look. I want to be honest that I have wondered ever since whether that was the greatest cowardice or the only wisdom of my life. And I've decided I don't need to know. I left. I walked back up that overgrown road at a pace I'm not proud of, and I drove out of Hollow County. And I have never gone back, and I never will. Here's why I'm telling this now, after all these years. Because the camp on the East Shore is still running. The good one. The bright one. The one they moved across the water. The one that tells itself the tragedy stayed behind on the far bank. It's a good camp. I'm sure the counselors are good people. I'm sure they count their kids, carefully, every day, the way you're supposed to. But the lake is the same lake. It is still owed. And a thing that is owed does not care which shore you build your camp on. And I think about Mr. Elias, over there in the dark on the dead west shore, 100 years old and counting, no one. A man built entirely out of the need to watch children on a lake. And I think about how much he must want, now, to be useful again. To be given the count again. To stand at a waterfront full of kids and do the one thing he was kept alive to do. One more time. Gentle and vigilant and doomed. There are children across the water now. He can see them. He's patient. He's been patient for 100 years. If you ever send your kid to a camp on a cold lake in the back of Hollow County, and there's a kind old man on the staff who everyone says has been there forever, who knows every child's name by the second day, who's gentle with the homesick ones, who's always, always softly counting the kids. Love him. Everyone does. He's easy to love. That's the whole problem. Just don't ever let him count yours. That's where we'll leave it tonight. If these stories kept you company, leave a like. It genuinely helps this channel find the people who'd want to hear it. Subscribe if you'd like to come along on the next journey out into Hollow County. There's a new one waiting for you every week. And if you've ever worked a camp, if you've ever been the one holding the clipboard at the waterfront, or walking a cabin with a flashlight at lights out, or standing at the back of the group photo, we'd like to hear about it. Email us your story. We may tell it here someday. Until then, remember, the count is always right. The water gives the children back every single night, as long as nobody answers.